Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Bex here today to do my nonfiction November wrap-up. I had originally set a goal to read, hopefully, these 5 books here. 4 of them went along with the prompts, and then one of them was just an extra one that if I had time it would have been fun to read. I sadly did not complete all 5 of them. I will briefly mention the 2 that I didn't finish. The first one was Blood at the Root, A Racial Cleansing in America by Patrick Phillips. I just didn't have time to get to this one, so it will go back on my TBR shelf. I am still very interested in reading it and will hopefully get to it next year. The other book that I didn't have time to get to was Who Do You Think You Are by Megan Smolniak. This was my little extra book, my other book that if I completed all 4 of these and I still had a bit of time left in November, I would read them. If you want to hear a bit more about these books, I will link my TBR video for Nonfiction November so you can get a little bit of a summary about what those are about. Because I want to focus on the 3 books that I actually did finish in Nonfiction November. I'll start with the first book that I read and completed, and that is Hidden Cities, Travels to the Secret Corners of the World's Greatest Metropolises, which is a memoir of urban exploration by Moses Gates. This is actually a book that Les gave me for my birthday, not this year, but last year, I believe. And so when I started this book, I obviously knew that I was going to be texting her at some point and letting her know how it was going. I chose this one for the design prompt because it's all about urban exploration, exploring above and below big cities around the world. And that idea intrigued me because urban exploration is cool, but it often involves a lot of trespassing and doing things you're not really supposed to do, and that's sort of, not really my thing. But at the same time, I liked the idea of it and I wanted to hear somebody's perspective. This book opens with Moses getting arrested at the top of Notre Dame. So that was a really good way to start the story, and then he kind of works backwards from there and tells you a little bit about his life and how he became interested in doing urban exploration, that moment where he finally pushed himself to actually go and do it and, step into the subway tunnels in New York City. He talks a lot about New York City, which is where he's based out of, and then he also talks about going in the catacombs in Paris. I have been to the catacombs, but I obviously only went on the path that you're allowed to go when you're down there. He and some other friends and connections that he's made in Paris explore the tunnels that aren't the main tunnels where people go and explore when they're visiting as tourists. And so he talks about people getting lost down there, the first person who died in the catacombs while checking things out, and the sort of provisions that they had to bring just in case they did get stuck down there for a long time, and that was so cool. So I'd say the first 100 pages of this book were 5-star level. I think that was around the time where I texted Les and I was like, this book is so good, I'm so glad you bought this for me, I'm really enjoying it. Unfortunately, from that point onwards, maybe a little bit later, it started to just get weaker. It's mostly a memoir about urban exploration, but he does talk about his love life a bit and his friends and whatnot. And that part I didn't mind, it was in there a bit. It definitely got heavier towards the end, as kind of catching up to where he is now. But then he started telling stories about other places that he's been and sort of the urban exploring that he had done. And it just wasn't as strong or as interesting as those parts set in New York City or in Paris. The stories were a lot shorter, there was just less exciting stuff, and so to have the book begin so strongly, and there was an entire chapter about a story where he was riding on a bus in South America, just kind of like a truck, riding in the back of a truck with a bunch of other tourists, and about how he had to poop, and it was an entire chapter about having to poop really badly, but not wanting, not being able to stop the truck and actually go. That was kind of the lowest point for me, was reading that entire chapter about the struggles to hold it in. And I was like, really? Does this really need to be included in the story? Because it just didn't fit. So that kind of brought the story down for me. So in the end, it evened out to a 4-star, because the beginning was so strong, but the ending definitely was a lot weaker. There's some cool stuff that's talked about in here. If you have any interest in the subject, I would recommend this book, just knowing that the beginning of it is much stronger than the rest of it, but you do learn some cool things, and it gives some little interesting tidbits as well. The second book that I read and completed was On Trails and Exploration by Robert Moore. This was my choice for the sport category because this book was inspired by a hike that the author did of the Appalachian Trail, which is over 2,000 miles. It runs from Georgia to Maine in the United States, and so that is definitely a sport level of hiking, so that's why I grabbed this. This book is about trails in our world, physical ones that you can see and then other ones that you cannot see, and it mostly follows a timeline of starting from the very basic forms of life and trails that they made, and how scientists today are studying these little blobby creatures to understand where we came from. Looking at these rocks off of the coast of Newfoundland and these little tiny trails that these blobs made, and then talking about animals and how they make trails. And then he also talks about how Native Americans make trails, and then when the Europeans came over, they began using those trails to create like carriage roads and then eventually, you know, paving them. So a lot of our roads are actually based originally off of Native American First Nations trails that they had walked between villages and whatnot. I decided to settle on 4 stars because the second half of the book was quite interesting, and I loved the chapter on the Appalachian Trail, or any time he was talking about his experience hiking the trail. That part was the parts that definitely appealed to me. The stuff about the animals wasn't as interesting, but I still thought it was well done and well written. On Trails took me a little bit, not only because the beginning was a bit slow, but because work started to get much more stressful for me. It was a lot busier, and I'm one of those people that when I'm stressed, I can't read because my mind just cannot focus. It wanders and whatnot. So it took me a lot longer to get through this one, which really slowed down my reading for the month and is the main reason why I did not get to the 4th book that I wanted to. But I did manage to read this 3rd book here. This was the selection for Voice, and it is A House in the Sky by Amanda Lindhout and Sarah Corbett. I had a plane ride at the end of the month from Toronto to Southern California and back, and that's a fair amount of flying, and as well as some downtime around American Thanksgiving because I was visiting family for that. So I got a chance to read this book in just a matter of about 4 days, which is a very powerful experience. This book was my choice for Voice because it's about Amanda Lindhout telling her story. She ended up in Iraq for a while, reporting on the war there. She was also in Afghanistan reporting on the war there. Very much like a self-made person. She wasn't partnered with any of the big news services like CBC or BBC. She was just doing it on her own, and at one point she decided to go to Somalia because at the time it was considered the most dangerous place in the world, and she wanted to report on the bad and the good things that were happening there. And after only being in the country for a few days, she was actually kidnapped along with a man, and the 2 of them were held captive for 15 months. Sarah Corbett is a writer who, from what I understand, Amanda and her were basically talking for a long time. Amanda was telling her story, Sarah was asking her questions, and the 2 of them wrote this book together because it was such an intense, traumatizing experience that Amanda went through. There was probably some decision at some point to have Amanda work with somebody else to write the story, to really get her thoughts down on the page. That definitely felt like the right decision because the writing in this book is so good. I am not somebody that likes reading about like dream sequences or people that are really inside their own head. And because Amanda is held captive for so long, there's a lot of this book that is just her in her own head, trying to get herself through this experience moment by moment, minute by minute. And the way it was written was never boring. It was always really interesting, and it was never too abstract to the point where I couldn't really understand what was going on in her head. Like, I always understood where she was coming from to some degree. As somebody who has never experienced this and hopefully never will, I definitely got that feeling, and I stayed up late to finish this book because it was so good, and I had this like feeling in my chest of anxiety and tension, and I just wanted everything to be okay, so I had to stay up and finish the book because there was no way I was going to be able to go to sleep. So this was an amazing experience to read, and so good, terrifying and very stress-inducing, but the story itself is, it makes for a really good nonfiction book. I gave it 5 stars. This is one of the few books this year that I've rated 5 stars, but just the reaction that it brought out in me and the experience of reading this book was just amazing, really. Terrifying, but amazing. This is a fairly popular book in Canada. Like, I always see it on display tables when I go into Indigo because Amanda is Canadian, but I don't think I've really seen many people from outside of Canada talk about it. So I really just want to mention that this book is so good, and if you like nonfiction books that are really intense and focus on a very incredible, unique experience, good or bad, in this case very bad, this is a book that you need to pick up because it is just, oh, so good. And that was how my reading month went. Definitely a little less awesome than I was hoping it would be, but it was sort of bolstered at the end by me getting to read another 5-star book for the year. If you guys participated in Nonfiction November, let me know how that went for you. A big thank you to Olive for being the main host for Nonfiction November, as well as a thank you to Natalie and the few others who helped Olive in different capacities this past month. As always, all of our links are in the down bar, so you can go check those out if you feel so inclined. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you later.